Right. In this tutorial, we're going to learn a little more about CN, the extraction operator that reads information from the keyboard, and how it reads integer data. Right. So C++ uses an abstraction called streams. I just always think of them as a stream of characters from the keyboard, right? As you're typing, the characters just sort of stream through, and they're stored in an area of memory. All right, so this abstraction is used for both input and output operations. By default, CN is attached to the keyboard, so it will get information from the keyboard. Cout will actually write things. It's a stream that writes things to our screen. And we really don't need to know. So the idea of an abstraction means we don't need to really understand how CN gets the information from the hardware and how things are working inside the operating system. Right. So we want to talk about then how does CN extract information from this input stream buffer? And by CN is attached to what's called the standard input stream, right? So we're going to talk about this in terms of how it reads integer data, but some of this we'll see in other tutorials applies to other types of data. So it's going to skip over leading white space characters, white space or blank spaces, tabs, new line character, which is the enter key press. It's going to stop at the first trailing white space. So I'll show you examples of this. The keyboard characters will only be transmitted to the program when the enter key or the return key is pressed, right? CN will sit and wait for information to be typed from the keyboard before your program goes on. And CN uses what's called the extraction operator, which looks like two greater than signs. Excuse me, I have a cold. A little trouble talking today. All right. And it determines how to interpret the characters it reads from this input buffer depending on the type, the data type that we're trying to read in. Okay, with integers, what we want to think about today is that they optionally can start with a plus or a negative sign. They don't have to. And CN is going to look for a string of digits in order to read those. So what I've got here then is a small program, right? If I'm going to use CN and Cout, I have to use the IOStream library where these objects are defined. So we've included that. I've got using namespace standard here to make it simpler in terms of I don't have to type the std : the namespace resolution operator. So to make our code a little simpler to read. All right, so I've declared a variable of type int. So integer can be positive or negative whole numbers. And we're going to prompt the user to enter a value. Then we're going to read it in with CN, and then we're going to output what the user types. So I'm just going to run this program. And so you can see our string, our message here printed out. And CN, or your program, is just sitting here waiting now. All right. So I'm just going to type the number 5 on the keyboard, and now I'm going to hit my enter key. Right? And we see that the value entered was 5. Same thing if we want to run this again. We can optionally type in a plus sign, right? The way integers are interpreted is if we don't have a leading plus sign, then it just assumes it's positive. But if I type plus 5, hit the enter key, you can see that it prints out 5, right? It's not going to print out, Cout will not print out a positive sign for positive numbers. There are ways to set flags to force that, but we rarely do that. Right. All right, so I'd like to let this example run multiple times. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little loop that says while count is less than 10. Actually, I'll make it 5, just so I don't have to run the program many times. So this loop will just repeat 5 times. And I need a variable called count, int count. I'm going to set this equal to 0, and I'm going to increment count to 1 at the end of each time, end of the loop. And all right, start without debugging. This should rebuild this. Good, no errors. All right. All right. So let's type, right, we did 5, we did +5. I'm going to type -5. Right, hit the enter key. You can see we had -5. And what the loop is doing is, see, this is just looping back around and running this section of code. All right, it's going to run this code inside here 5 times when counting 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. This test condition will be true. All right, so now, all right, we've seen positive, negative signs. I'm going to actually type the space bar, and then I'm going to type 5 and hit the enter key. And you can see we still get the same result. It actually skipped over the space that I typed. All right, so it's waiting for me to enter again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the enter key. So when I hit the enter key, because there's been nothing else typed in, notice that CN is still waiting. All the enter key effectively did was made my cursor go down to the next line. And so now if I type 5 and hit the enter key again, you can see it reads the value of 5. So by typing the enter key before I typed anything, any other numbers it could read, you see in that case, that was leading white space of a new line character that it skipped over. All right. Like I said, we can type numbers other than 5, right? Any other integer it's going to be happy with. If I type, actually, I'm going to type a space and enter, and now some value. If I type space, 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 and then hit the enter key, notice it's extracting our digits. It's looking for a string of digits to extract. All right, so this ran 5 times. All right, now let's talk about what happens when we type some digits it doesn't understand, or some characters. All right. So if I start this running again, right? So it's looking for a string of digits. What happens if I type a non-numeric character that's not white space? So what happens if I type the letter A and hit the enter key? Well, what happened is this came along and said, well, my value entered was 0. And then what happened is it ran this loop multiple times trying to read from the keyboard. Because what happened is this A was never extracted. When it can't read something, so it's looking for an integer value. When it doesn't find a digit, the stream fails to read. Now, under the newer, I think C++ 2011 standards and newer, it's actually trying to, it stored a value of 0 in our variable. But what this loop did is it kept coming back around trying to read the same thing over and over because we had not cleared information out of our buffer. And I'm going to hit the enter key here. And let's just see now. All right, I'm going to run this again. All right. So I'm going to type the number 1. I'm going to hit a space. I'm going to type the number 2, hit a space, type the number 3, hit a space, type the number 4, hit a space, type the number 5, and hit the enter key. And you could not see that because it was on my other screen. I apologize. Oh, try to get it to pop up on the right screen. All right, so sorry. What I did was I hit the number 1, space, 2, space, 3, space, 4, space, 5, enter key. Right. And you can see then, right, so the first time it read the number 1, right? There was no leading white space. It saw the first digit. The trailing white space told it to stop reading. So we got the number 1. It said value entered 1. Now, as this loop back around, this message popped up saying enter integer value, but it didn't wait for us to type anything else on the keyboard because it already had 2 space, sorry, it had space 2, space 3, space 4, space 5 sitting there in that stream. So what it did is the next time is it skipped over this blank, this white space character, read the number 2, right? It looped back around. When it tried to read CN, there was already a character sitting in the stream, so it skipped over this space, read 3. Same thing, as it looped back around, it skipped over space, read 4, skipped over space, read 5. So that's sort of an example of if your stream is full of other valid digits that it can read, right? It will just, if they're already in the stream, it will read things that are there. So just simply because we typed this and hit the enter key did not mean that it cleared everything out of the stream. All right, that's important to remember, and we'll see how to clear the stream in a future example. Right, like I said, it's able to read all kinds of integers. Right, you can play around with this. It just doesn't have to be single digits, right? I could say minus spaces, right? Oh, yeah, 0 is going to interpret that as octal. Right. I hit my enter key. I had 4 values there. So notice the 5th time through, it's emptied the stream. It's now waiting for me to enter something else. Now I could enter, and actually accidentally hit the equal key instead of the minus. So it actually then said, I don't know what to do with this equal key. So I'm going to fail to read. I'm going to say that the value entered was 0. I'm going to store 0 in the variable. And then since that was the last time through the loop, it actually just quit running. All right. So the basic idea then to remember is that when you're using cin to read information, in this case, it knew to look for an integer value simply because we defined x as an int and we told it to read in x. So remember then, it's going to skip over any leading white space. It's going to stop input at any trailing white space. And it's going to be looking for digits, right? Things can start with a plus or a minus sign, and then it's going to look for a string of digits. All right. I'm going to get rid of this loop here. All right. And I'm going to get rid of that. If we run this one more time, as I could have left in the loop, but all right. If we run this one more time, remember it liked -5. What if I type -5 plus 5? Well, what it should read in is just -5, right? The leading then negative sign was fine. It saw a digit, but then when it saw this next character that was a non-numeric character, a non-digit, it stopped reading and said, okay, I can interpret -5 as an integer. Right. So play around with this a little bit, get to know how it reads this information in from the keyboard, from a stream, and then we'll take a look at how we can recover from when we type in an incorrect character. Right. That's the end of this first tutorial. Sorry about the call, folks.